Welcome to Supply Circles, stories from the innovators, disruptors and improvers in supply chain management today. Brought to you by AI Group.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to Supply Circles, or welcome if this is your first visit to our fortnightly program. It's good to have you listening in. My name is James Scotland. I'm coming to you today from Yungabar country, and this is Supply Circles, the business improvement podcast that asks the question, how can we in Australia create supply chains that are resilient and sustainable at a time when we're implementing the challenges of the 3Ds to your extended supply chains and to your business? Digitalisation, decarbonisation and diversification, the need to build a broader business base that is not overly dependent on any single relationship, whether that be a product, a technology, a supply chain or an export market. We're all facing the 3Ds and we're all facing the need to build sustainable supply chains. Each fortnight, I delve into different sections of the end-to-end supply chain. I chat with fascinating and interesting people, and we try to have some fun along the way. So this is the good news. This is our 50th episode, and I want to thank all of you for your support and comments and encouragements. It's an important topic, and I appreciate your feedback. You know, when we started the podcast, we named it Supply Circles because we knew that very soon, in order to be sustainable, the conversation is going to be more about circular economy and supply chain circular operations rather than the linear operations that we've been in for many years. And so today, for our 50th episode, I want to talk about circular economy. And to do that with me is my good friend Brendan O'Keefe from CSC Advisory. Brendan and I go back many years, and he is a specialist in circular supply chain thinking. He and I were both senior people in the Australian Supply Chain Institute, and he's one of those people that I just keep bumping into, even if I don't necessarily want to. The last time we bumped into each other, I was in the tunnels underneath Wyndham Station in Sydney, looking at some displays of Indigenous culture, and along rolled Brendan, and we ended up having a coffee and, as always, a great chat. So I know today's going to be a great chat. Welcome, Brendan. It's good to catch up with you.
Thank you, James, and what a wonderful introduction. I do remember how we bumped in together, and it's always a lovely surprise when we do so.
Yeah, you meet somewhere around the country and a coffee or a drink. It's always a great chat.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about circular supply chains, moving from linear to circular. We've had this conversation many times. What is it? Give me a definition. What are we talking about when we talk about circular?
Yeah, great question. It can be one that can go very deep and very technical, but I'd prefer to give you, I suppose, the view I have, which is simplistic in a way. It's really around taking resource and material that we have and we take probably for granted, but using that resource and material for its extended life. So when we talk about how we recycle things in the broader context, James, the actual reality is recycling is the bottom end of the chain. There is so much more we can do with materials that are in use in different products that can be reused, repurposed, remanufactured, etc. So I think it's somewhat changing the view of what we use in our common resources and actually designing. And it actually starts with the design phase around designing material and products better so they can be reused and repurposed further on. And here's where the economy bit comes in, James, because this is all about creating value. So rather than the old school, and you've mentioned the linear economy or linear supply chains, where you take, make and waste, basically it gets disposed of. In this environment, you are actually looking at the very front end of the materials that go into manufacturing of a product. But then as you're looking at that product end of life, from a company's perspective and from a consumer perspective, you're really looking at how this can be reused, repurposed, returned to the manufacturer for those materials to be extracted again. So I think a lot of people probably don't see its true value at this point because it hasn't been properly explored. We're on that journey.
I like that. I like that definition. The idea of of using the resources and the materials for their extended life,
Yes.
instead of looking at the product itself and its extended life. So what we're saying is that the use of a product is not the end of the resources or the end of the material's life. There is more to come after that, and so we can repurpose. And I like this idea, and we'll pick it up, the idea of designing at the very beginning your product so that you can repurpose towards the end. Now, I said at the intro that you're a specialist in this. You've been doing some training and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But just tell us about yourself. How did you get here, and what training have you done recently? I know that's a Dorothy Dixie because I know you did some training.
Yeah, no, it's so on that front, James, as when we met back in the days of ASCII, I was very much I would say, traditionalist, linear supply chain type guy. Didn't really know a lot about this new advent. It's not that new, actually, but ultimately the transition to circularity and sustainable supply chains. So for me, a curiosity, if you like, or a leaning into the conversation led to me undertaking a few different courses. The first one, which was probably the real eye-opener, was these short executive programs through the different universities, was a sustainable supply chain management, which really was fantastic in the sense of very live, very real case studies of what is happening versus the theory. Then that took me down a path of undertaking a program in decarbonisation towards net zero. Then I went a little bit skew-ways and I undertook a program in ESG finance. So I think what we all understand is this transition will occur, but how is it financed? And obviously it's coming under now a very specific type of financing, which is under ESG investment. And then more recently, I suppose, because I'm probably not finished studies, you never know when that avenue continues, was a certification, which is the Sustainable Supply Chain and Logistics Professional. So that was more a bookend in terms of bringing a lot of those contents together, to be fair. But I think for me, it's once you get into these topics, you realize how much breadth and depth there is. So while I undertook short programs, you can see why people get into undertaking masters in these areas.
Yeah. One of the issues that you've probably looked at is the value aspect of it. You mentioned it before. The biggest problem I see in supply chains, and why we were not, talking about circular back when we first met, hundreds of years ago, is because when you look at a balance sheet, you buy a piece of equipment, you capex it over, say, 10 years. At the end of 10 years, there's no value left in that piece of equipment. And so you either sell it and make a little bit of money, or you just get rid of it. This is the problem, isn't it? We're not seeing that the resources and materials that are in our products that we're selling or buying have an extended life.
100%, James. So this is a very real conversation I was having with a very large utility organization where they have assets in their field which have an extended life. We will say maybe 20 years in operation before they're replaced. So what they would do, as described, is at the end of life, decommission the units, and then these units would be sold for scrap value to one of the large scrap metal companies, and they'd get a very residual price in return. The question I pose to them is, why do you see it as a scrap when you're replacing the asset with something very similar, newer technology, but the core materials in this, just to be specific, are around steel and metals from a frame perspective. And then inside, you have precious materials like copper, platinum, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So the question I posed to them was, have you not considered the end life value from a circular procurement perspective in having that conversation with your supplier, which ultimately is the same supplier you buy it from year in year, and using the end of life asset value as a trade value of return logistics of the material.
So you're saying you sell it back to them, but buy it, use it, sell it back. Is that what you're
exactly?
And they hadn't considered that, or is it just
never,
not feasible?
Not even in the consideration. So now it's actually started them to look at what you might call, we're going off a little bit here, but one of the particular areas of circular procurement or sustainable procurement, where you are factoring in a value of material. Let's say it's material that goes into a raw material as in your bill of materials, for example. You're factoring in the fact that this has a value at the end of life, or what is deemed of end of life, James, and that can be extracted and returned through a reverse logistics process.
Where's that value identified, in the balance sheet, or is it in the agreement that you're making with the supplier?
So it's in the there's two ways of doing it. You can do it under your asset value if it's let's say a fixed asset, as in a utility environment where it's in situ in the field. You can look at a lower depreciation value over the term of life of the asset. But you can also look at it as on a procurement contract, that there'll be a percentage value return. So it might be, mightn't be huge, but it could be 5 or 10%. So under a procurement circular or sustainable procurement frame versus a standard contract of exchange of purchase, you are bidding in or building in a value of material from a return logistics perspective.
Is there such a thing as circular procurement? Did you make that up, or is that a thing?
Absolutely. It's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Globally, locally? Tell me about it.
Yeah, so where it's really taking, if we look at Europe, is probably where we're looking at the leadership in these areas. Organizations are looking at where they can, particularly for the higher value of their procurement spend, where they can actually capture it goes back into the traceable supply chain, James. So they're looking at the security of materials long term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that actually means as well that you're tying in your suppliers, or understanding that traceability, you're tying in the supplier. So having security for materials in long term.
Uh-huh.
So where it's focused, the highest value of costs or on a procurement project, but then looking at the materials, looking at the risk of materials flow and longevity of materials. So you put that into frame, and if you can, in some sense, build a surety of supply of materials into the future through this sustainable procurement lens, then you are actually guaranteeing your own supply chain through your suppliers.
So you're saying that this is driven to a degree by ESG because of the environment aspect of this ESG. Also just about ensuring that you have a sustainable supply chain. You've got one that can keep going because we're starting to run out of minerals. So it sounded like you were saying there's two aspects to this.
Yes. So a great example would be sort of when we look at this whole general or very big energy transition that we need to go through. The key materials, there's lots of them, of course, James, but to put some classes on them, you've got steel, you've got concrete, and you've got precious metals, are probably just broader classifications I'll focus on. So you look at two of those, steel and concrete are what, are termed the hard to abate industries.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and you've got an issue with decarbonisation in the same context. So you're trying to solve two problems in one blow here. So what a lot of businesses are trying to do is build in when there's, and it's changing in the design of buildings, more recycled material being used back into buildings. So is that the need for the high intensity of operation is being reduced. Okay.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're kind of reducing the carbon threshold by volume perspective, but the specifics of new material being created is very much on maybe a specific element of building designs or engineering requirements, if that makes sense. But then you look at the precious materials. So we're in this real flux of the demand for precious materials that will be in everything that goes through this energy transition. All sorts of batteries, you name it, EVs, everything we look at will become electrified to some degree or another.
Yeah.
If we don't capture back the materials, it's not an infinite resource. We know that. I think our awareness, though, is that probably right now we'll just keep mining it from wherever we can get it from. So we need to really look at once we're mining it, how is it being designed into products, James? And then what is the solution at end of life of that product? How is it going to be recovered? So you're capturing it again, going back to this circular procurement bit. There's a bit of a responsibility under your procurement contract with that organization to take ownership of recapturing it. Maybe it goes to a third party to extract it, but ultimately you're protecting some security around the value of the material.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot going on here. I mean, I've heard it said, and you might know more than me, you probably do, that I've heard it said that there are now more minerals above the earth than below the earth. Have you heard that?
Yes, there is. So you look at, and I think we need to look, from an Australian landscape, where we learn from best practice will be taking to the European countries probably as your best landscape. So things that have been happening in Europe for the last 5 and 10 and maybe longer years that we have not yet adopted. So one simple example might be, and it's probably a good example for the context of people going, well, the people are pro and negative to EV transition. The argument may be they go, oh, well, we're extracting so many materials. Is that sustainable? Is that the right thing to do versus the emissions, etc.? But then roll this forward, and this is actually real and live and happening. So, and I'll just quote a brand here because it's been around the longest time. So the Tesla car battery, which is a very stable battery, has now, what's happening is it's being used as a static battery in buildings. So it's taken out of the vehicle. It's being put into a vehicle. So you've got a 60 kilowatt battery. Maybe it's more, but just for argument's sake, a 60 kilowatt static battery as your storage battery in a building. Now, people might say, well, that's great, Brendan, but what happens next? So the next phase is that the battery, and this is kind of where we're going with evolution of technology. So how are the materials extracted from the Tesla battery? So there are solutions that are ready and that is happening. But when it becomes more wide scale, then, and you can apply this across all EV battery types, that the material, it goes from a dynamic battery in a vehicle to a static battery in a building or a storage to extract the materials back.
Use the material, yeah. It's not the end of life of the material or the resources, So we can use, and then we can reuse, and then we can extract and use it in a different setting. It's all pretty exciting stuff. Is it happening in Australia?
In Australia, we are laggards. And I guess, to be fair, our population and demand and maybe some of the policies around this has been a bit slower. So no, the answer is no. However, there are companies in Australia right now that have developed solutions to this specific example. I'm talking about, James, in taking batteries and even up to EV level scale size batteries and doing the material extraction. It's taking a while. So the particular company I'm referring to is based in Victoria, but it's taken a while. One of the key challenges is that not all states are on the same, let's call it, legislative platform. So what Victoria may do or decide to do is slightly different to what New South Wales, is slightly different to Queensland, etc. So it makes it tough then to build scalable solutions. When you think about what will be okay in one state, might have a different set of guidelines or changes, but it means that to build scale makes it harder.
Yeah. We had some other speakers on the podcast over the last 50 episodes talking about redesigning for sustainability. We talked about packaging being a very important part of sustainability and also standards. Let's come back and talk about those. We'll take a break and come back and talk about that. Some interesting stuff here. I didn't know some of this stuff, so that's good to have you bring me up to date. I'd always like to ask a sort of a personal question before we go to the break. It's possible that you have an accent, and your name's Brendan O'Keefe. What's your heritage, Brendan?
My heritage background, James, for those who haven't picked up, is Irish.
Get out.
Been in Australia for now over half of my life, so I'm giving away maybe some age benchmarks, but. So, in coming to Australia, it was very much around, opportunity and the weather and everything else. And then it becomes your life when you settle here. So have a lot to be grateful for in being in this lovely, great country.
It is a great country, and there is a lot of diversity, which I think really adds to it. I just adore that part of Australia. Let's take a break and we'll come back and talk about some more specifics on circular economy and circular supply chain.
If you have supply chain or business improvement challenges, contact AI Group's Business Improvement and Growth Hub. The Big Hub is a library of practical and relevant resources designed to assist member businesses to grow and improve. The Big Hub also includes an extensive network of experienced, pre-qualified business improvement consultants. For more details, contact big@aigroup.com.au. That's big@aigroup.com.au.
Brendan, I probably should see if there's a difference between circular supply chain and the circular economy. Yeah. They're interchangeable, aren't they, or are they different?
No, different. So here is where when you get into definitions, this is where the difference is. If you like, how I broadly describe is circular supply chain is part of the matrix of circular economy. So broader circular economy is probably your greater definition around the use of materials and but it also, that's the technical side. But if we look at circular economy, it also looks at the nature side of things. So you look at the biosphere element.
Oh, I see.
Which we haven't probably capped upon. And it's important that we start to probably recognize that not all solutions are technical, because when we look at, from a future perspective, I think Australia is very well primed. When we look at the transition, we need to really start to consider carbon pricing, I think, ultimately.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there's an area that Australia, with such broad, vast landscape, we have a tremendous opportunity with our carbon sinks, as they call them, using our land and as an opportunity to create carbon sinks for development of far more green space, for carbon capture and so on. So this is an area that I think if we, truly work and collaborate on the basis of with First Nations people, as has been mentioned at the very start, James, we can do a lot more. And I think we don't need as many technical solutions because we can use nature, and nature is very powerful in what it can do to kind of reverse some of the issues of what we have today. Quite frankly.
Yeah. Good differentiation between circular supply chains and the circular economy. Yeah. So we talked about before about changing the design and then changing the packaging. We picked up procurement, writing it into writing a reuse and a repackaging into the procurement agreement. But there's also standards. Let's see if we can unpack a couple of those. How do you go about redesigning? I mean, what's the keys there? How do I redesign my products? What do I think about? I don't ask you to tell me how to redesign my products, but what sort of issues do I think about when I'm thinking, maybe I could do a better job with my ESG or with my carbon footprint by product design?
No, absolutely. So I think what we probably need to do is, from a product design perspective, you look at firstly the materials that are used. So where there's possibilities to swap materials that have no recyclability or very difficult recyclability opportunity, look at how we can exchange for those that are. It also is around the design element. Do we have something that has got over-design perspective to something that we can more simply design or modular design? It clicks together. You have not one complete unit, but it might be made up of, I think it goes back to the product designers to take away complex to make more simple where possible.
Well, I love the idea of if you design it to have a sort of a longer life, not so disposable. And I have written into my supply agreement that I'm going to buy it back from you anyway after a set period. Yep. There is a whole new approach to this idea of longevity about what my product is supposed to do.
Yeah. So the other thing we have, in the linear economy, we just make waste, we consume and we dispose ultimately. If we can change the thinking to going, which is now becoming mandated in Europe, and I'll talk about this in a moment, where you have easier repair of the product rather than expecting the consumer to go out and buy the replacement or the newer model when there's a failure on the existing model. You can actually repair it as a return to your customer and have that supply chain logistics built in. And when it comes to end of life failure or terminal end of life use of material, there are companies, James, that are doing this in Australia because they are global companies. People can return their end of life product that they no longer use as part of an exchange because they want to buy a new product, but the existing product materials will be used and recycled into new manufacturing.
Yeah, it's all the thinking, isn't it? Because if I buy something that has that becomes technologically obsolete within 3 years, but it's got a 5-year design to it, I can return it, get a new one, and what I return can be used to be reused or to be pulled apart and remanufactured. It's a case of understanding that technical obsolescence might kick in a lot faster than product obsolescence.
Absolutely. And I think, if we go back to I won't say the olden days, but certainly...
we know the olden days, Brendan, you and I, the old days.
There's an element here, James, and I just capture, we've gone from a generation or over a period of a generation of our parents or grandparents being resourceful, which really is kind of the whole crux of circular economy principle of resourceful to, this generation, or maybe it's the last 10 or so years, we've just accelerated our materialization or materialism and wastefulness. So on that point of repair in Europe, and I'll just look at France as a very particular leading example here, they have written in laws of right to repair for the consumer. So what that is doing to be it the manufacturers or product companies, is that they need to look at their design and ultimately give people the opportunity to to repair and replace. And that is subsidized by the government under a scheme. Yeah. So, and what it's also doing, James, we look at the skills transition, a lot of technical skills, like trade-related skills, if we look at what's happening, are becoming defunct because of our, nobody's fixing stuff anymore.
Sure. Future skills are different from past.
So skills are being lost or depleted out of the economy. So it's trying to make sure that skills, maintenance and fabrication and other related skills are being maintained relevance and, will continue. They'll need to adapt with new technologies and products that are moving this way.
The other aspect is packaging, because for the last 10, 20, whatever years, we've had packet raids. We try to rip open these oil-based packaging, which I hope are a thing of the past because they were just stupid anyway. But what I saw, Brendan, recently, I saw a photo of grocery shopping, I think, in the 50s. And you sort of, went through the cashier and there was someone who put your groceries into a bag. Guess what? Those bags were paper bags.
Yes.
And now we've gone from paper bags to plastic bags. And now when you go to the supermarket, if you need a bag, you get a paper one. It's almost like we've gone circular in our thinking, as well as whatever I'm trying to say. But circular economy includes packaging. We've got to get rid of this wastefulness of throwing stuff in the dump. How do we do that?
Yeah. So, this is just a personal story, and not that I try. Let's say when I need to buy a consumer item from, and I'll just give the example of the store because they do this, which is good. Good Guys, when you're, say, buying a bulk electrical or related type item, obviously it comes with a lot of packaging for good reasons, product security, safety. So before I buy it, I check with them that I can bring back, if I can take as much packaging off the box or off the product before I leave, I will. But it might not be right to do that. But let's say you bring home the box, it's got all the packaging, the internals, etc. My covenant and deal with Good Guys is, can I bring back the packaging to you? Quite often, I get a very unusual eyebrow response of going, we're not asked that very often. Why do you ask? They say, well, I don't want the packaging, but I said, I've seen you in your back lot there near your warehouse. You've got 2 recyclable bins, obviously with all of the packaging. So I said, I just want to, as a consumer, return the packaging to you and you can responsibly manage it. And they're good with it. Now, I think this is probably a message that as a retailer, in whatever facet of retail you're in, you probably need to be pushing back to some of your suppliers and going, we need your help with this. We want to promote the reduction of packaging where possible. But where, let's say, we're at a minimal packaging, let's make sure that it's easy for the consumer to return it responsibly so as it doesn't go further into a waste disposal environment. That's not the solution, but I guess it creates the consciousness for then further up the chain, manufacturers going, how do we reduce the amount of packaging that we are putting around products? And how do we shorten the time that we can get it returned back into a recyclable material?
So the reverse logistics becomes a key part as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're seeing in distribution centres these days is the need to, previously you were required to pack your products onto a pallet and then plastic wrap it. We're seeing that move away from the plastic wrap because that's just getting cut up and thrown away. It's amazingly expensive and inefficient, although it was very good. Plastic wrap is very good. It's it's so good at what it does.
I would honestly say to you, James, people say, well, plastic is a terrible thing. There's so much without plastic today, we just wouldn't be able to survive. You look at food storage as an example and so on, shelf life of when we go into the supermarket, that's there because we use plastic packaging.
Well, we had a food manufacturer on the program a while ago, Margaret from Nestle, and she said they put their products in plastic because it is by far the best packaging by far. They're trying to get Kit Kat into a reusable kind of covering, but food needs to be protected, and plastic does that. So it's not necessarily the bad guy.
No.
We just need to understand we just need to be better at trying to figure out how to use it.
Yeah, and I think this stems into another area, not so much circular economy, but it does actually go into the decarbonization type of areas. So if you think about plastics coming from oil-based refined materials in the first place, then how about you give the high carbon content of plastic, which is its extreme value, how about you take that into a waste, let's call it a waste to energy application. So you take the waste materials and then you can, if you like, combust them or convert that energy into reusable energy into other forms. So you have then taken, if you like, the waste, as in the waste doesn't sit in the environment, it is captured.
Right.
And the waste is turned to an energy source, which can be back, the best models of this might be a good example that you have a very large company, they are getting the reverse logistics of their packaging, and then they're using the packaging, repurposing as much of it as they can, but what they can't reuse, they are putting into an energy conversion process, using the energy as part of their energy security. So they're using it within their own environment rather than extracting energy from, say, the grid, or, they may have solar, but they can use this energy within their own environment.
You make it a good case, and there's a lot to it. It does sound very complicated. What does a business do if it's thinking, okay, I want to manage my carbon footprint, I want to manage my sustainability? How do I go start thinking about circular economy? How do I go about starting my thinking?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And it's a question I get quite a lot, James, because there's so many elements to consider and very confusing for a lot of good reasons. What I generally will start and say to any given organization is understand your supply chain. And what the exercise I do is a first case in point. So understanding supply chain with the element of undertaking a supply chain map. And I don't use the term sustainable supply chain map because this is where we focus on what's possible in our normal supply chains. Mm-hmm. So that exercise, James, is one that can be, depending on complexity, to be fair, of the supply chain. But let's say you're a manufacturer, just as a good example here. You're looking at your input materials to your products, your bill of materials, ultimately. Mm-hmm. We're not trying to drill down to every single item. We are looking at it from a procurement lens as well, of going, what is the 80-20? Where does 80% of our money for 20% of the materials that we use? So we look at the high level priority. Then we look at the actual, those materials themselves. We need to look a little bit further back in terms of where the materials come from, not just the supplier we get them from, but Who do they get them from? Are there elements and risks within the supply chain that we're not aware of, that we should be aware of? Because it might be, like in the COVID pandemic period, it could be a major disruption if there was another event or climate event and your supply chain just stops.
So your suggestion is the best place to start is looking at what you're buying?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
not so much look at your markets, but look at what you're buying. Yep.
Exactly. So start with what you know, and then you will figure out pretty quickly, most businesses will spend, might have a long tail of suppliers, but the reality is there's probably 2 or 3 that are absolutely critical. They couldn't operate tomorrow if that supplier wasn't able to deliver.
Yeah.
So look at where your focus is. Look at what that company is doing as well. If you're in a true partnership, what is that company doing in terms of their sustainability or their supply chain sustainability? You need to work together. This is the one element, is that companies are probably used to competing or, working very independently.
Well, not with a true partnership. It should be working together.
Yes.
So look at your upstream is the best place to start, and then we can add in things like then start thinking about how you design your products and how you're packaging it. It's been a good conversation. We'll put your details on the show notes. But how do people get in contact with you? Is it LinkedIn or is it best through?
Yeah. So I have both a company page on LinkedIn. People want to just Google Circular Supply Chain Advisory, they should be able to find me. But on LinkedIn, use the same search.
We'll put the contact details on in the show notes. Yeah,
and website as well, which is www.cscadvisory.com.
What's next for you, Brendan?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I started off undertaking some local work, but now it's expanded, James, into undertaking some major project at the moment is up in the Middle East, which is a circular economy study across an industry sector.
Wow, that sounds good.
So, which is, wonderful. And I think there's the great thing is that the more organizations that lean into this space, and what I would broadly say is the impact and the benefits are from the collaboration. So, rather than, and if there was any word of advice I could give to anybody who's listening and interested, is don't be afraid to share and collaborate and to act as a community, because this is how we don't have the time to solve all these solutions independently, and we won't. So we just need to get together. And I love the framing of your brand being Supply Circles, James, because it's very much around, we need to be thinking within circles, within communities.
Well, we like it. It means not only circular economy, but also that the people involved in supply chain management and business improvement should be working in circles, in engaging with each other and looking to create true efficiency, not just or true effectiveness, not just efficiency. It's been great having you on the show. It's always good to chat. We'll have to have a coffee soon.
Likewise. Thank you so much, James. Really appreciate the time this morning.
Absolute pleasure. Well, that's it for another episode of Supply Circles. Thanks again to everyone who's for listening, and thanks for your feedback. If you have any feedback on today's interview or ideas for the show, or just want to give me some feedback, hit me up at james.scotland@aigroup.com.au or head over to my LinkedIn page. I'd love to hear from you. And we'll be back in a fortnight with more business improvement insights into the keys to sustainable supply chains. Thanks for joining me. This is Supply Circles. I'm James Scotland. Bye for now.